dokie. Hello to all my friends, foes, and facilitators. Good to see you. I'm Tad. I will be here until about 2 o'clock. It's 1 now here in California, the Golden Land, the state by the sea. Well, lots of our states are by the sea. But there's only 3 of them as far as I know. 4. Well, I'm not sure about Alaska. I was going to say there's only 3 of them that border on the Pacific. Alaska, it's way up there. That may be the Bering Sea or something up there where Alaska is. I don't know, and I apologize in advance to any Alaskans who may be grimacing in horror at my lack of geographical knowledge. I guess that means I am never going to be on any useful quiz shows, make a lot of money, and live out my declining years in peace and prosperity. Guess I'll have to keep writing. Anyway, good to see you all. I hope you all are well. I am doing quite well, actually, in part, and in large part, because we have most of a kitchen. I think we pretty much have an entire kitchen now, actually, now that the disposal is hooked up and the water's running. Yeah, I think we have most of a kitchen now. We haven't had a chance to use it yet because just things are things and life is life. But and a lot of the stuff is still in boxes. But we have a kitchen. It's really exciting. Not only as a kitchen qua kitchen, but also because from the moment that we moved into this house back in about 2011, I think it was, we hated that kitchen. We hated it with a deep and burning passion. We hated it with the fire of 1,000 suns. We have always hated that kitchen. It was, the rest of the house is really interesting. Those of you, there will be a few of you out there who've been here. They will know that it's an interesting house anyway because it's an octagon and the upstairs is kind of all open plan, and we made it even more that way. But the kitchen was always a blot on the landscape. It was always a hideous thing. It seemed to have been created at a time when it seemed appropriate to keep the people who were in the kitchen working sort of imprisoned in the kitchen to make sure that they didn't try to come out and socialize with the important people or something. I don't know. It was very 60s, 70s kind of a thing, including like cabinets hanging down between the kitchen and the dining room table, and hideously sharp angles that required you to maneuver carefully if more than one person was in the kitchen at the same time, which is a pain in the butt, and all kinds of things. So from the moment we moved in, we always said, oh, we love this house so much, except that kitchen has to go. So not only is there the pleasure of having a kitchen back after 2 months or whatever, 3 months of not having a kitchen, but just the immense pleasure of finally having a decent, nice, open kitchen that fits with the rest of the house and things like that. It's very exciting. So I know it's boring. I apologize in advance. I wish I had more exciting things to tell you about, but this is the center of my world right now, and it's very, very exciting for us finally having a kitchen again. As you can see, now that that's done, the dominoes will begin to fall, as I keep talking about, and eventually I will get all this crap out of here, be able to make the office nice again, make it a place that I can actually walk around in, as opposed to walking this very narrow little path between the door and my desk and the bathroom and not be able to reach any of the rest of it. You will, of course, see there's cat activity in the background there. Is that PJ jumping up on the shelf? I think so. So the cats are happy. We had a day of relatively little rain today, so the dogs are happy. We have a kitchen, so I'm happy. And so is Deborah. And our daughter, who is currently staying with us, is happy too, although she claimed she was going to be cooking this weekend, and that didn't happen. And she didn't even stay in tonight, so young people. Anyway, let me just quick check in and see anybody who has shown up and any comments. See, now Facebook is telling me 1 comment, and I can see 4 of them on the page already, so I have no idea. Anyway, let me say hello to the people who are here. I see Rosalba. Hello, good to see you. Bienvenido. I see Anamika. Hello. I see Ilva. Hello, darling. Iris. Hello, Isaac. And Suzanne and Wouter and Jeremy. Hi, Jeremy. And Christy and Sandra, or Sandra, still not sure which way. Mark Redmond. Carol Aitken is here, and Debbie and Nikki. Hello to all of you. Lovely to have you with me. Sandra is checking in from Vienna, so I'm guessing it's Sandra rather than Sandra, which is how we say it in America because we love to take those European vowels and smash them out flat. That's what we like to do. Rosalba says she is still waiting for her kitchen. Yeah, I feel your pain. I feel your pain. I see a happy Easter wish. I almost said happy birthday. Happy Easter wish from Anamika, and I say happy birthday to you back again. Although actually, it's not a birthday, is it? It's Easter is a well, it's a kind of a birthday. It's a rebirth day, if you are a believer. And Winter, hello, Winter. Good to see you. I think that's the people who've checked in so far. Again, it still says I've only got one comment. I can see a bunch of them here on the page. I see and there's a list which has like 12, 13 people on it. And yet it's telling me one comment. I've had one comment. Oh, Lord, Lord, Lord. Anyway, I will not go on and on and on with my gripes about Facebook. I know it's boring. What can I tell you? I am boring. This is my life, sitting in front of this computer, using various bits of technology, trying to express myself as best I can and stay in touch with the people that I care about, among whom I count all of you. Therefore, I have every right to be grumpy when technology doesn't work right. Anyway, so what else is there to tell? Went back to work on Heirs of Ordinary Farm. That's Heirs, Heirs, not like AIRS. Heirs of Ordinary Farm I went back to work on today after having had, some time to kind of ramp back up. One of the interesting things about writing is, although I can jump from thinking about one project to thinking about another quite easily. I can even think about 2 or 3 different projects within the same, sitting around thinking session without much problem at all. However, when I'm writing, actually writing things down, it's really difficult to go from one project to the other. It takes me a day or two to ramp up again, where I have to reread what I last wrote and look at it, get a feeling for the pace again. I've talked about this in the past. I find writing, especially long books, to be a very kind of a musical, compositional process. I feel things. I feel like, oh, this is running slower than it should, or faster than it should, or I need a beat here. I need to bring a certain theme back. It feels very much like music to me, and it's very, very difficult to just jump back into something. It takes me a little while to think it through, to kind of feel it again. It also means I go back and reread what I had last written, or sometimes, as I did with the Ordinary Farm book, I went back and reread the whole thing because it's comparatively short. In opposition to the hideous, huge tomes that I'm normally writing, like the one that I just finished, The Navigator's Children. So it's strange to jump back into a project that you haven't been working on for a while, or any change of gears, and I need to kind of feel it and get the feeling again and find the rhythm. So I had a couple of abortive tries yesterday and the day before. Kind of, I wrote a couple sentences and went, doesn't feel right, and went back and reread some more, and and kind of then finally found the groove, I guess, today. And didn't write a huge amount, 5-6 pages, but that's a day's work. That's a creditable day's work for a novelist. And more importantly, though, it's a step back into the rhythm of the project itself and into the rhythm of the story and the movement of the story. I don't know, it's hard to explain more than that, but it was very helpful to finally get to that point because it means I've cracked it. You know, it's like breaking the ice at a party. You know, it you have to, somebody has to do something or say something, and then everybody relaxes and like it's just normal. And in a weird way, it's kind of like that. I have to sneak back up on my characters and persuade them that, yeah, I'm the same guy and I was handling you guys before, and trust me, I'll handle you again with safety and dignity or something. No, I'm not one of those writers who thinks their characters talk to them or who talks to their characters. In my early days as a fantasy writer, it was a trope I ran into quite frequently among some of my new writer friends. And one of the things to understand about me is that although I've always been a reader of science fiction and fantasy, I was not sort of in the field. I didn't go to conventions. I wasn't somebody who was a wannabe writer. I was doing, as I've mentioned at great length, I was doing other things, and then for a variety of reasons decided to try to write a book and was lucky enough to sell the book. And from that point on, I was in the field. But it was not anything that I knew very well. I hadn't gone to conventions. I hadn't hung out with writers or other wannabe writers or anything. It was all quite new to me. So the first few times where I sat down and people were telling, you know, other writers were telling me, yes, and my characters stand right beside me and tell me, I want to do this, I want to do that. And I remember thinking at the time, good God, that sounds limiting. That's like having your kids tell you how to do your job, you know, that you do for a living or something. I mean, if their characters, don't you have control over them? I mean, yeah, and I understand that was not necessary. They were not literally saying their characters were talking to them. These people were not crazy. They were actually very nice and very good writers, almost all of them. But for me, I've always been a very conscious writer. And I work in a very conscious way. That doesn't mean that things don't float up from the subconscious. Obviously, anybody who reads my work has seen my repetitive use of various themes and tropes and whatnot, themes particularly, that are things that for some reason are important to me. And I don't know why. You know, I write lots of stories in which tunnels and being lost underground features heavily. I have never been lost underground. I have never been lost in a tunnel, as far as I can remember. And if I was, I would have been very, very young, and it would have been like not a real tunnel, but like something at the playground. But I don't even remember anything like that. I think it's just a fascination that I have. I think it's got that whole Joseph Campbell thing about the descent and the climbing out again, and it's just something that works for me, and so it keeps coming up. There are other things that I can more easily name that are themes of mine that come up a lot. One of them is lost and vanished cities, and I've explained, I think, to readers here in the past that when I was young, I wanted to be an archaeologist, in part because I read a wonderful book by Robert Silverberg, the very fine science fiction writer whom I now consider a friend. He may not feel the same way, but you know, called Lost Cities and Vanished Civilizations. I've mentioned this before, I know, so forgive me for going back over old territory. But I was so taken by that book, and especially by the story of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, which had been completely lost to most cultural memory, except for perhaps within Cambodia. But even there, it was like the way that the Mayan cities were here in North and Central America. They were, you know, they had disappeared under jungle. And although people remembered the culture in a general way, they didn't necessarily remember where the cities were or what it had been like to live there or anything like that, because hundreds of years had passed. And the same thing was true for the people of Angkor and other places in the Khmer Empire in Cambodia. Anyway, but that one in particular really fascinated me. And of course, these things all work their way into my text after time. But all of that said, and yes, I do remember that I started this out to explain something. All of that said, yes, there are subconscious elements that seep up. There are things from dreams that I've had, although I don't remember most of my dreams. But there are things like that that have made their way in. But a lot of the rest of it is very conscious. I am not just kind of flying blind, following, some kind of a wispy muse or anything like that. I mean, I am in George R.R. Martin's definition, I am an architect more than I am a pantser. And so there's an element of pantsing involved in my work, but I am primarily an architect. I build things, and they have certain logic to them, and I don't feel satisfied with them unless they feel logically coherent to me. Anyway, okay, so that's a lot of blather, but I hope some of it at least was vaguely interesting. I'm going to check back and see if there's anybody else I should say hello to. I still only have, it says I only have one comment on, yeah, it says I only have one comment, but I see I have many more than one comment. So let me check who else has come in. Andre has come in. Isaac, my dear, dear mother-in-law Hazel has checked in to say hello. Hello, darling. Good to see you. And Winter, of course, who I already did say hello to. And now Janice has checked in. Hello, Janice. Good to see you. And Isaac says, in the words of D-Light, groove is in the heart. And is that not true? That is so very true. So to all of you who are celebrating Easter, who are Easter people, I wish you a very happy Easter this weekend. And with that, I think I am going to start reading, if that's okay, since everything else seems to be working. Okay, so what has happened is in the last chapter, Tiamat went down to the docks of the Hayholt to put Brother Etan on a boat going south to hunt for whatever happened to Josua and Vorsheva and their children, because nobody in the Hayholt, or presumably anywhere in the High Ward, seemed to know what happened to them. So as he's on his way back from there, Tiamat sees a surprising ship coming into the harbor, hurries back down, and discovers that it is his friend Lord Angus, and he had written to Angus about the mysterious and very frightening book, the Etheric Whispers, which Etan had found in Prince John Jos, the late Prince John Josua's effects. And so Angus has come because he's fascinated by the idea, and that's what was going on. Then on their way back to the castle, we had, and of course there was an earlier scene with Aelair, but that's going to be explained in just a minute as to what happened there, so I won't bother to sum that up. So they're on their way back to the castle. They are stopped outside the castle, and there is an unusual amount of armed guards around, and they have to go through they have to explain who they are, despite the fact that Tiamat is one of the king and queen's most important advisors. So that's what's happening. Then you may continue. The sergeant turned and signaled to the guardhouse. A moment later, the portcullis began to creak upward. What in Brynjolf's name has happened? Angus wondered as they drove through. We shall know soon enough. Tiamat's heart was pounding. It seemed to take a very long time for the carriage to make its way through the gates of the two inner bailies, but as they approached the front of the royal residence, Tiamat saw even more guards posted outside. To his slight relief, he also saw Pasivales in urgent conversation with Zachiel, the guard captain. Did we decide how I was pronouncing that? Just a briefing. I can't remember if it's Zachiel or Zachiel. Whatever. If somebody remembers, they can tell me on the Facebook page. Anyway, the guard captain. Lord Chancellor, Tiamat called as the carriage rolled to a halt on the broad drive before the residence, and a half a dozen Erkenguard moved forward to surround it. What happens here? Praise be to Elysia and her saints, Pasivales said as he approached. His face was pale, and his hair was wet, as if he had been called directly from his bath. I'm glad to see you are well, Lord Tiamak. The king and queen were most concerned when we could not find you. I have been at the docks, saying goodbye to one friend and discovering, quite to my surprise, that another has arrived. Lord Pasiphalis, this is Angus, former Viscount of Carpilbin, now first factor of Ebongate. I have heard of you, my lord. Forgive me for not bowing, Angus replied. Angus is disabled. He's in a huge chair. He basically can't use his legs at all and can only use his arms a little bit. So just so it's clear. But what is going on here? Tiamat asked. You said the king and queen. They are both well. In fact, said Pasiphalis, everybody is well except for the poor fool who tried to kill Count Aelair, and even he is not too badly hurt. His expression belied his casual words. Tiamat had never seen the stolid Lord Chancellor so upset. His anger was obvious, fierce, and also new to Tiamat. He was glad he was not its target. What? Tiamat could only stare. Suddenly, Pasiphalis' pale features and disheveled appearance made sense. Was Aolair harmed? A stab wound near his shoulder that struck bone, or it would have been worse. Some cuts to his hands, said the Lord Chancellor. We are fortunate his attacker was no soldier. He seems to have been a madman. He has worked here in the castle for more than a year. A Hernister man. It sank in after a moment and seemed to settle in Tiamat's guts. A Hernister man? Did he work in the kitchen? Is his name... Oh, what was it? Is his name Riggin? Yes, I think that's what someone said. Do you know him? I know of him. My wife tended to him once. He was in no hurry to tell the rest of the story, of the man babbling about the Morriga, the mother of crows. Has he been questioned? Yes, but he speaks no sense, said Pasiphalis. You may see him later if you wish. I would be pleased to have your thoughts. But who was he? Come inside, and you will have answers to all your questions, Pasiphalis told him. The king and queen will want to know you have been found, alive and hale. He waved, signaling to the guards that the carriage's occupants were welcome inside the residence. At Tiamat's request, the guard captain picked out 4 strong soldiers to carry Angus's litter into the throne hall. As he limped after the litter, ignoring the murmurs of the soldiers as they struggled beneath Lord Angus's considerable weight, Tiamat found his thoughts swirling like a flock of marsh teal startled into flight. On the one hand, the attack had apparently been the work of some kind of lunatic, one of Aolair's own countrymen with who knew what kind of mad, festering grudge, likely a meaningless and fortunately bootless crime. But it also felt like the vision of disaster that had come to him on the plains of the Frost March, showing its true form at last. Evil times, he thought helplessly, almost as if someone else spoke in his head. With so many strange signs, how can I doubt that evil times are truly upon us? He who always steps on sand, please guide me now, because I feel the ground turning treacherous all around me. Chapter 39. Let me see if I can return the focus here. Come back. Focus, focus, focus. Focus on this blobby pink thing here in the middle. That's actually me. There you go. No, you lost it again. You silly focus. Okay. Whatever. We'll see. Chapter 39. A Grassland Wedding. It was hot again. Very hot for the 3rd green moon. The air seemed to crackle as if someone had rubbed a dry fleece across it, and when Framer looked through the wagon's small window, he could see no clouds anywhere. He felt as though some fell creature breathed on his neck, but he knew he could not delay going out to join the clan any longer. His sister, Kolva, was being married to Drojan, and his brother Odrig was giving the feast. He untangled the ribbons of his best shirt one last time. Before the day was ended, he knew the full-sleeved white garment would be dripping with his sweat and muddy from the hands of others, from being clapped on the back and dragged into unwanted wrestling matches with drunken guests. His aunt would have to sew on new ribbons because half of them would be torn off during the festivities. It would all feel different, he thought, if Drojan was not such a pig. Framer saw nothing wrong with a woman, even his sister Kolva being given away in marriage to a man chosen by the head of the family, especially when the head of the family was also the clan's thane. That was how it had always been done. But when their father, Hervolt, had been thane, before he had been struck dumb and crippled by the gods, he would have balked at giving one of his daughters to a swaggering fool like Drojan, whose only accomplishment was that of being Odrig's crony. And, in fact, Hervolt had given their oldest sister to a man she cared for, although he could have chosen a richer suitor. The clan's happiness is more important to a thane than it is to any other clansman, his father had told him once. A thane must always think with two minds, both his own and the wisdom of his ancestors, and the ancestors care only that the clan survives. His father was one of the first people Framer saw when he stepped down from the wagon onto the grass of the paddock where the wedding feast was to take place. Hervolt sat on a bench in the scant shade of the wagon, wrapped in blankets despite the heat, his body as curled and useless as a fallen leaf. Framer kneeled at his father's feet. May the Sky Piercer watch over you, and may he bring you joy on your daughter's wedding day. His father rolled his eyes in Framer's direction, but otherwise gave no sign of having heard. He had not spoken for 7 summers, but he had always been a strong man, and even though he could not speak or feed himself and could not walk without 2 men supporting him, he lived on. Framer wondered what the Sky Piercer, the clan's guardian, meant by this terrible exercise of letting Hervolt go on breathing long after he had lost his manhood. We are Crane Clan, he reminded himself. We do not question the Sky Piercer. The expanse of grass, with Odrig's herd of horses fenced at one end, was surrounded by wagons of all sizes. Every member of Clan Cragny was there. No, Framer corrected himself, almost every member, as well as important folk from neighboring clans, like the Dragonfly, Adder, and White Spot Deer, with whom the Cranes often intermarried. Framer's family, at least the women and his many nieces and nephews, had already taken their places near Thane Odrig's wagon. As usual, the younger boys were playing at men's work, straddling the wooden paddock fence as though it were a horse's saddle, smacking at each other with long sticks, and, of course, ignoring all warnings from their female relatives. Several of Framer's aunts and cousins whistled to him as he walked past. He nodded, but did not stop, even when some of the boys begged him to. Most of the rest of the clan folk had gathered in the center of the paddock, where a tent had been erected for the bride to wait, and where food and drink were laid out on colorful blankets and covered with fairy nets to keep the flies away. Although Odrig had not stinted, buying several barrels of Stone Dweller beer to swell the happiness of the feast, those barrels had not been breached. That did not mean that the day's drinking had not begun. Many of the clansmen had brought their own yerut, the fermented mare's milk that the Thrivings folk had drunk since time before time. The number of snoring, bearded men scattered across the grass, along with the sour smell of vomit, told Framer all that he needed to know. Odrig stood near the tent with Drojan and several others, passing a skin of yerut and playing a knife-throwing game directed at the paddock's nearest fence post, a few dozen paces away. Fremer knew he should stop and speak the blessing of the sky piercer to his brother the Thane, but at that moment he did not want to talk to Odrig, still less Drojan, whose charms were not improved by the crimson flush of drunkenness or the gap-toothed bray of his laughter. Fremer made a wider circuit out into the paddock so he could reach the tent from the other side without having to talk to the Thane and his closest supporters. He was not particularly successful. "Hoy there, little brother!" Odrig shouted. "Where are you going? Not to the bride's tent to sit with the women, I hope." "He wants you to choose him a husband, Thane," bellowed Drojan. Odrig enjoyed this jest and grabbed Drojan's scarred face and squeezed it as if it was a child. "Mark your new brother, Mouse," he said. "Come and drink his health. Or must I start looking, as Drojan says, for a strong man to take care of you? I do not think I could get many horses for you, though, scrawny thing that you are." "That's what a veil is for," suggested another of his brother's friends, and they all laughed. It was no use trying to avoid them completely. Ignoring Odrig only made him more determined. And in truth, Fremer himself was not entirely certain what it was that filled him with such unease and disgust today. Drojan was a pig, but as Odrig's friend he would prosper, and their sister would be well kept, with thick blankets and a fine wagon. Kulva might not like him, but that was often the case among Thrithing's brides, and more often than not the wife learned in time to care about her husband as well as care for him. "I will join you in a moment," he told Odrig. "I wish to give our sister a blessing." "I will give her something more than that tonight," crowed Drojan. "Like the rabbit who married a bear, she will be limping tomorrow morning." Odrig seemed to find this even funnier than the others did. Again he gripped Drojan's face with drunken fondness, wiggling his friend's head from side to side like a father with a beloved child. "Unless the bear drinks too much," Odrig said, "and can only offer his bride a limp willow branch as his wedding gift." More hilarity. Fremer waved, doing his best to smile, and continued on his way. The wedding tent was a precious thing made of true Khandian silk, or so his mother had once told him. She had awaited her own marriage in it, as had her mother and grandmother before her. The outside walls were stitched in an ornamental pattern of blue rivers and lakes and green grass, a sort of map of their family's history in the land the stone dwellers called the Lake Thrithings. A red pennant festooned with crane feathers and daubed with the symbol of the sky piercer waved at the top of the conical tent, and ribbons fluttered from every corner and all around the doorway. Two men called bride guards, clothed in leather armor and holding long spears, waited outside the tent on either side of the doorway. One of them tried to stop Fremer as he approached, but the other said, "He can go in. He is the bride's brother, and the shaman is already there." Fremer had guessed as much. Because the shaman was male, the women's sanctuary of the tent had been pierced, and legitimate male visitors were now allowed. Still, he stopped before the doorway and wiped the sweat from his face, then murmured his apologies to the Mother of the Green for entering her territory, before lifting the flap to step inside. It was dark within the tent and hotter inside than out. In the moments it took his eyes to make peace with the darkness, he thought he saw a hunched, two-headed figure wearing a face out of nightmare. His heart sped for a moment before he realized it was only the shapes of his sister and old Burtan, the shaman, as he bent over her to perform the ritual purification with ash and salt. It was strange that Burtan, whom Fremer had known his whole life, should become such a fearsome figure with only the donning of a headdress and leather mask, but so it was. When he saw the priest look up at him, Fremer felt a moment of superstitious terror, though he knew that the old shaman only stared because he was nearly blind. "The blessings of the skies upon you, grandfather," he said, as was expected, and pulled a small silver coin from his pocket, he had brought for just this moment. "I would speak with the bride. I am her brother." "I know you, Framer," said Bertan, his voice reedy but his annoyance plain. "Do not think me so old, so foolish." Only at that moment, as it came close to his face, did he notice the coin in Fremer's fingers. "Ah, so. Of course, but do not take long. The horns will sound at sun high, and that is not long now." How the old man knew that after sitting in a darkened tent all morning, Framer was not sure. "You are wise, grandfather," was all he said. Even an old shaman with milky eyes should never be mocked or angered. In fact, as his sister had once pointed out, the older ones were closer to death, and thus closer to the gods, and so should be humored whenever possible. Both gods and shamans could easily bring down bad luck on those who displeased them. The shaman whispered something to Framer's aunt, who laughed quietly. She sat beside Kulva, in place of their mother, who had died in the year of the autumn floods, 2 winters before Odrig first became leader of the Crane clan. 5 other female relatives were also crowded into the small tent, which smelled of sweat and the scented oils burning in small clay lamps. The lamps were not meant to provide light. The top of the wedding tent, where the poles came together, was open to the bright sky, but to entice the spirit of the sky piercer to swoop low to smell their sweet odor and bless the coming marriage. "Are you well, Kulva?" Framer asked his sister. She stirred to life only slowly, as if she had been thinking of something or someone quite different than her surroundings. She wore the full curved headdress and veil so that only her eyes were visible. Again, Framer felt a quiver of superstitious discomfort. In her white blanket and white veil, his sister looked like a ghost. He thought she also looked bleary, as though she had been drinking, too. It was not impossible to imagine her female relatives giving her a few sips of yerut for courage on this important day. "Is that you, Framer?" she said at last. "How is our father? Is he happy?" It seemed an odd question, all else considered. "I saw him. He appears no different than he did yesterday, or will tomorrow. I was wondering what he would think to see me married to Drojan." "He would be happy to see you given to a man with a brave future in the clan, I'm sure." "Would he?" She sounded weary, distant. "Perhaps. It must be nearly time. The shaman will call you when the sun is at the top of the sky." "So little time left," she said. "So little time." "Because you are married does not mean you will be a different person. You will still be Kulva, still gentle as the dove for which you were named. And doves are often shot by men with bows, brought home in a sack to the cook fire, given out to the Thane's favorites." "Do not speak that way." Despite the fact that her disquiet echoed his own, Framer turned to his aunt and the other women. "Why do you let her go on like this? Isn't it your job to prepare her for her wedding day? To bring her to her husband in good cheer?" One of his female relatives made a noise in the back of her throat. "Oh, yes." "Like a lamb to the sacrificial stone." "Quiet, you," said Framer's aunt. "She will be well, nephew. She will bring the family honor. Crane women are strong." "Strong," said Kulva, and began to laugh quietly. Framer was taken aback. He had hoped in part that seeing his sister dressed in the old manner, in the company of women who had themselves been readied for their own weddings, would make him feel steadier, might even puncture the grim mood that hovered over him like a thundercloud. Instead, it had made things worse, or at least it had revealed to him things he had not wanted to know. "Are you unhappy, sister?" But what you do is blessed. The Sky Piercer wants you to be fruitful. The Sky Piercer wants you to enlarge the clan. Are these such terrible things for a woman to do?" "Oh, no," she said. "Does not every woman wish to be married? Does not every woman want a husband who can tell her what to do after she leaves her father's house?" "Girl, you walk on treacherous ground," one of the women said. "Leave us now, Fremer." His aunt's face seemed to show both amusement and concern. For a moment, and it was only a moment, Fremer had a vision of a world he had never quite imagined before, the world of women when no men were present. It felt as though a familiar path had suddenly turned to slip sand beneath his feet. He again asked for the blessing of the crane, although his sister was still laughing quietly to herself, and he felt sure she did not hear him. Then he went out into the strong, bold light of the sun again. No clouds hung in the sky, but he could still feel his own cloud hovering close. Standing at the paddock gate, which was festooned in ribbons and draped with a fine carpet, the 3 callers lifted horns to their lips and blew, 3 short bursts, then 3 long. They repeated the call, which hung over the paddock like something tangible, as if the hot air was too thick to allow the sounds to disperse entirely. Drojan and Odrig, who had gone out of the gate only moments before, now returned, Fremer's brother dressed in the full finery of a thane, with a fur cape over his shoulders and the ancient signet of the Crane clan hanging on a thong around his neck. Drojan, his mustaches extravagantly oiled, was wearing a bridegroom's decorated shirt and a wide sash around his waist that were already rumpled and stained. "We come for a bride," said Drojan, slurring his words a little. "Are we welcome?" "You are welcome in this camp," said the chief of the callers, and then the 3 hornblowers led the groom and the thane toward the tent. They stopped under the canopy that had been erected in front of the tent door. Fremer envied them even that small patch of shade. The shaman appeared from the tent so quickly and noiselessly that it was hard to believe he had lived almost 80 summers. He still wore his leather mask. Other than his eyes, the hanging mask revealed only the bottom of his almost toothless mouth. "Who comes to this place?" the old man asked in a voice that seemed to have grown considerably stronger since the last time Fremer had heard him speak. "A bridegroom, seeking his bride," said Drojan. He whispered something to Odrig, but the thane did not respond, looking out across the gathered clansfolk as if searching for something or someone. "And has the bride price been paid?" asked Burtan. 7 fine horses," Drojan said. "Damn fine horses, isn't that right?" Again, Odrig seemed not to be paying attention, but he nodded. The old shaman began to chant in a tongue that none of the other clansfolk understood, a tongue that some said had been given to the first clansmen when the first spirit had made them. As he did, Kulva was led from the tent by the women, out under the canopy. They were singing, a counterpoint to the shaman's chant, with words that women had sung at grassland weddings since the sun was young. "May you have a son in front of you. May you have a daughter beside you. May your hand be dipped in oil. May your hand be dipped in flour. May you hold your tongue. May you not blame your husband's mother. May you respect your clan elders. May you yield to younger ones in time. May you be modest and keep your wagon clean." As the shaman finished, a breeze came up, the first one Fremer had felt all day, making the canopy and the walls of the tent flutter. Guests turned to each other with smiles at this sign of the spirit's favor, and even Fremer felt himself relax a little as the shaman sprinkled more salt and ash in a circle around the canopy. Drojan pushed himself in beside Kulva, jostling one of her older female relatives as he passed and earning a look that would have curled the hair of anyone less oblivious. "Is it not time yet to get to the binding, old man?" the groom asked loudly. "The day is hot, and I am waiting for my beer and my bed." A few of the guests laughed, although enough looked on with flat expressions that it was clear Drojan was not the most beloved member of Clan Cragny. But before the irritated shaman could answer him, another voice spoke up. "You do not need a bed, Drojan the Foul. You need a sty." Even as Drojan peered out into the surrounding crowd of guests in reddening fury, Fremer's heart sank from behind his ribs down into his gut, then lay there, heavy as an ancestor stone. He knew the voice. It was Unver's. And worse, Unver sounded very drunk. The tall man stepped out of the throng, the wedding guests parting before him. Unver's garments were muddy and ragged, as if he had slept several days out of doors, but, as if in some horrible jest, he wore over them the long, spotlessly clean vest of a suitor, covered with bright stitchery of birds and flowers. Fremer was relieved to see that at least Unver's long, curved sword still hung in its scabbard on his belt. "What do you want?" Drojan cried, sounding genuinely surprised in his drunkenness. "You have no place here, half-breed. Go away. This is my wedding day." Odrig laughed loudly. "There, you heard the bridegroom. You are not wanted at this feast, no matter how hungry you are." "I am hungry for what is mine," Unver said, peering out from underneath an oily tangle of black hair. "It is you, Odrig, who must answer." Odrig put on a look of mock astonishment. "Me? You blame me for what? You did not call the Vitmars, did not proclaim the betrothal to the clans," said Unver in a deep, cold voice, although he stumbled a little in his words. "That is against our law." "Against our law?" Odrig laughed again. "You, outsider, would tell me about our law. Begone before I make an example of you. I too have the horses. I have 7 horses for Kulva's bride price." "Awful!" shouted Drojan, and lurched forward to grab Unver by the collar. Unver dealt him a blow to the head that sent Drojan stumbling and reeling. The groom tripped and fell to the ground, muddying his garments. A few watchers laughed, and Fremer saw that the crowd was not entirely against Unver. "You have 7 horses?" said Odrig, watching Drojan struggling to regain his feet. "That is amusing, since your stepfather Zakar also had 7 fine horses, which he traded to me only yesterday for several cows and my second best wagon. He is quite a wealthy man now, your stepfather." For a moment Unver only stood, for the first time seeming to realize that something was happening here beyond a drunken argument. Those horses are mine. He had no right." "Take it up with the old man, not me," Odrig began, but even as he spoke, Fremer saw that Drojan had regained his feet, eyes and face both red with rage. He stumbled toward Unver with a long dagger in his hand. Fremer opened his mouth to call a warning, but someone else spoke first. "Unver!" cried Kulva. "Where?" The sound of her voice startled him, but he turned in time to catch Drojan's arm, then twisted it so hard the bridegroom cried out in pain as Unver threw him to the ground. Drojan was shorter but powerfully muscled, and not such a coward that he would only strike from behind. Within a moment he climbed back onto his feet and lunged toward his enemy once more. Unver still had not drawn his own sword or dagger, and this time Drojan almost managed to drive the blade into his guts before he could stop him. They wrestled, first on their feet, like two shambling bears, the knife pressing against the bird stitched on Unver's breast. Then their feet went out from under them and they rolled together on the ground. "No! Stop them!" Kolva tried to run forward, but Odrig caught her and yanked her back, knocking her tall headdress askew. She hung, helpless in his powerful grip, her feet barely touching the ground. "Let them settle it, woman," growled Odrig. "Let your husband finish with your lover. If Drojan is willing to take you spoiled, then vengeance is his right." At first it seemed vengeance might be swift in coming. On the ground, Unver's greater height was no advantage, and Drojan had the knife. Also, Framer could almost believe that Unver was not fighting as hard as he could, as if, somehow, death were merely one more way the day might end for him. Then Drojan found a momentary opening and tried to stab at Unver's face, swiping the blade along his cheek and jaw, opening a terrible cut that immediately began shooting. Sorry, let me try that one again. Then Drojan found a momentary opening and tried to stab at Unver's face, swiping the blade along his cheek and jaw, opening a terrible cut that immediately began sheeting blood down the tall man's face and neck. A strange sound arose then, a low rumble that for a panicky moment Framer thought might be the gods themselves shaking the ground in rage at this sacrilegious display. Then he realized it was no tremor but Unver, growling deep in his chest as he fought with bare hands to keep Drojan's knife away from his body. As the crowd leaned forward to watch, some shouting, many more in silent fear, Unver wrapped one hand around the wrist of Drojan's knife hand, then put his other hand under the bridegroom's chin and pushed until Drojan's head tipped back at a painful angle. Unver then brought a knee up and threw the other man over onto his side. Mud and torn grass were flung in all directions as they struggled together. Then a strained, gurgling cry rose from the confused tangle of limbs. A moment later, both men fell back and lay still. Before anyone dared to move closer, Unver slid himself out of his enemy's grasp. Drojan did not move, but lay face down as his life blood pooled beneath him, painting the bright grass. But it was not Drojan for whom the bride cried out. "Unver!" she cried. "Oh, Unver, why?" "Dead. On his own cursed blade." Unver sat up, his once spotless vest now smeared and spattered with blood, his face a red mask, then slowly got to his feet, tottering a little and struggling for breath. "You saw," he said to the wide-eyed onlookers. "I fought only to defend myself." Odrig had gone as pale as the frost that dusted the long grass in winter. He grabbed his sister around the waist and lifted her off her feet, holding her against his chest as easily as if she were a child, though she struggled to get free. "You!" he shouted at Unver, his voice hoarse with fury. "Do you think you can come into the Thane's land? Into my own paddock? Kill my friend and bondsman and be suffered to live? Give me Kolva." Unver's outstretched arms were wet with blood to the elbows. "I seek no other quarrel. We will go away. The Crane clan will not see us again." "The Crane clan will not see you, because you will be buried beneath the pen where the pigs shit," said Odrig. "Do you think I would give my sister to you, even if you had paid the bride price? You, a cast-off of the Stallion clan, the whelp of a coward and a whore. My father was a fool to take you in." "Your father was a good man before he lost his wits," said Unver. He let his hand stray to his own sword and its muddied hilt. "You are nothing like him," Odrig pulled Kulva close, clenched his hand in her hair, and pulled tight, so that the bridal headdress tore free and fell to the ground in a tumble of ribbons and bright pins. "She will never be yours, outsider. I would see her dead first. I will see her dead first." And then, in a swift, terrible instant, Odrig's knife was out and in his hand. He dragged it across Kulva's throat below the chin, freeing a leaping spray of red. Women and even some men shouted out in horror. Kulva's hands came up as if to close the dreadful wound, but then the Thane released her and she dropped to all fours, blood gurgling out onto the ground. Framer felt himself grow faint. The world darkened to a great tunnel around that cataract of red. His sister. Their sister. Odrig had killed their sister. Unver yanked at his sword so hard that he half pulled the scabbard from his belt, then leaped toward the Thane with a bellow of helpless, furious pain. Odrig drew his own blade, calm as a man sitting down to eat supper, and stepped over dying Kulva as though she were nothing but a rock or a tuft of grass. The two swords clashed and rebounded. Guests screamed and cursed as they threw themselves back from the fighters. Unver's struggle with Drojan had been a thing of dirt and grunting silence, two drunken, angry men rolling on the ground, fighting over a single knife. This was something entirely different. A flicker of shining blades, a dance of clanging metal. Within moments, the grass around the pair had been torn away or stamped down into black mud. Unver, Framer could see, was still slowed by drunkenness, but his eyes blazed with a fury Framer had never seen, even in battle, against the men of the cities. Odrig was even larger than Unver, the biggest man in the clan, but he recognized the power of his opponent's anger and did not waste any more breath on taunts or curses. Framer could no more prevent this fight than catch lightning in his hands. He knew it would only end when someone died, and Framer could not make himself believe that Unver might win. He ran to Kulva's side and kneeled beside her, but the blood was running out of her too fast to be staunched. He tried to hold the wound closed, but blood pulsed out between his fingers. It all seemed like a terrible dream. His own helplessness, the clansfolk's shouts and shocked faces, his sister's dying noises. Odrig and Unver circled each other, and their curved swords flew back and forth like the beaks of birds, neither man able to get past the other's guard, neither foolish enough to engage too closely too soon. Unver, still hot with rage, took a swipe at Odrig's face. Then, when the Thane blocked him with his blade, he tried to score Odrig's face with his sword's point. He missed by the length of a fingernail, but Odrig's eyes widened and he redoubled his efforts, hammering away with blow after clanging blow, so that Unver could do nothing but defend himself and slowly give ground. The circle of trampled grass and pitted mud widened beneath them. Wedding guests now stumbling over each other in their hurry to get out of the way. The sun was high in the sky. Both men were sweating heavily, and Unver Longlegs was covered with blood, much of it his own. He lost his grip on his sword for a moment, and Odrig almost flicked the weapon out of his hand. But although he had to throw himself to the ground and roll away to avoid Odrig's slashing attack, he managed to hang on to his weapon and direct away another strike that had been intended as a killing blow. But this time the sharp edge of Odrig's sword bit into his left shoulder before he could knock it away. Now that his enemy was bleeding from his shoulder as well, Odrig backed off a step and took a slower, more deliberate approach, fighting mostly to keep Unver moving and the blood flowing from his wound until it exhausted him. It seemed like a strategy that could not fail, and indeed, after several more rattling flurries of blows, it became apparent that Unver was slowing down. By the way, I'm going to read till this section is done, so I know it's now 2 o'clock. He ceased making attacks, concentrating instead on keeping Odrig's long, probing blade away. Odrig responded by changing his tactics to slash at Unver's legs and exposed arms whenever possible, and by doing this gave him several more small but bloody wounds. Unver misstepped, barely avoided a blow to his head, then stumbled again, his free hand clutching his belly. It seemed plain that the fight was nearly over. Sickened, Framer turned Kulva closer to his chest, as if to shield her from the sight of Unver's imminent death, but he could not look at her face for more than an instant. Her eyes were open, as if she looked at him in accusation. "I did nothing," he said quietly, but a black, hopeless rage boiled inside him. "I could do nothing." At the sound of several loud clangs in succession, he looked up. Unver was in a half-crouch, doing his best to slip Odrig's heavy strokes. Clearly, the Thane meant to end this. The sun beat down and the grass sparkled with wet scarlet. Unver had several more wounds, so many that it was hard to count them in the general mire of his bloodied clothing. Then, just as Odrig drew back for a better killing angle, Unver leaped up at him with what must have been his final strength and swung at his head. Odrig guided the blow away easily with his own blade, then turned his sword over, trapping Unver's weapon. But the sound of their two weapons striking each other seemed so odd and muffled that even Odrig, the path of his death stroke now open, hesitated for a moment to glance at the blade he had turned aside. It was not Unver's sword that had swung toward the Thane's head and was now imprisoned by the grip of Odrig's own blade. It was Unver's scabbard, torn loose from his belt. His sword was still in his other hand. Odrig had only a moment to gape. Then, even as the realization of what he was seeing drained the blood from his face, Unver plunged his own curved blade into Odrig's belly so hard that its point tented the back of his feast day garment. The ending came so suddenly and so surprisingly that none of the guests even cried out. Odrig's knees went limp. He collapsed onto Unver, who held him up for a moment, his own legs shaking, then stepped out of the way and let the Thane fall into the mud. And that's where we're going to stop. Boop. Okay, there, I put my bookmark in for tomorrow. And so, that went pretty fast. It is 3 minutes after 2, so I'm going to hang it up for the night. As always, it was a huge pleasure to share some time with you. I hope you enjoyed that section. It was, I hate writing sword fights, but I like having written them, if that makes any sense. They're a big part of this kind of work, you know, and fighting in general is, of course, in any sort of adventure story. But I'm never so much interested in the fight itself. I'm much more interested in how it feels, either to the people having it or the people watching it or the people who are trying to stay out of it or whatever. So anyway, so with that, I will say goodnight and ask you all please to take good care of yourselves and your loved ones and your friends and neighbors. If you celebrate Easter, I hope you have a very happy Easter Sunday tomorrow. Whether you do or don't, you are welcome to join me at 7 p.m. when I will be reading once more. Until that moment, until that glad moment of reunion comes, I thank you once more and say peace and good night.